Hi Middles, I am going to explain to you in this video how to analyze a poem and how to kind of look at the poem and think about all of the poetic devices within that poem. So, for my analysis, I'm going to be using the poem Daycare Disasters, which is one that we looked at a couple of weeks ago. So, we're going to go through this poem and fill in our poetry and poem analysis template. So, to start off with, the first thing that I did was I read the poem to make sure that I had it in my head and to refresh my memory because it's been a couple of weeks since I've read it. When I read the poem, I read it out loud. It's really important to read poems out loud, especially when you are thinking about things like rhythm and rhyme. It's very hard to figure out what the rhythm is and what the rhyme is when you're reading it in your head. So we want to definitely read it out loud. So if I'm reading the first verse, I would read, "My mother runs a daycare. She's so wonderful with kids. And every day when I get home, she tells me what they did. Scott put Play-Doh in his ears, then ate a huge mud pie. Mitch smeared lunch all down the walls, then rubbed some in his eye. Cassie took some scissors, then cut off her teddy's ears, and when they wouldn't go back on, she collapsed in floods of tears. Jill wrecked Kelly's artwork. Holly washed her hands with glue. Nathan poured his glass of milk into Jemima's shoe. Bob bit Harry on the hand. Allie kicked her toe. Julie cried for hours and hours. What for? I'll never know. My mother runs a daycare and she says it's really cool, but secretly I'm quite relieved that I can go to school." So once I've read the poem out loud, I'm then going to come back to my sheet here. And the first thing we're going to think about is the context, audience, and purpose. So what is this poem about? So this poem is about it's about a mother running a daycare at home and a girl being glad she gets to go to school. So she's not home for daycare. Daycare is one word. Who was the poem written for? I think because this poem it's a girl talking about her mother running daycare and the disasters that happen there, I would think that she's kind of probably writing it for her friends and other people her age because she's saying, my mother runs a daycare and saying how glad she is that she doesn't have to be there. So this poem is written for children who would be the same age as the girl who wrote it, or maybe even for her friends. Okay. What is the purpose of the poem? Why has she written it? I think she has written this poem to tell people about all the disasters that happen at daycare, maybe to warn people from running a daycare. She's like, oh, don't run a daycare. Lots of disasters. All the. All right, so there I've finished my context, audience, and purpose. So now we're going to move on to looking at the poetic devices that we have been learning about in these tasks here today. So the first thing we're going to look at is the structure. So the structure of a poem is how it's sort of set out. So does it have I guess they're kind of paragraphs, but in a poem we call them verses. So you see how all the the poem's been broken up into parts that look like paragraphs, but they're actually called verses in a poem. So one thing to do with the structure, if I have a look here, describe the structure of the poem. Are there verses? Are they short or long? So if I look at my structure, I definitely have verses, and I would say that they're quite short. So I'm going to say the poem has short verses. Now, next I'm going to look at the line structure of the poem. So are the lines short, long, or both? So I'm going to look at the lines. Now, I notice here that each verse has 4 lines, and they're all about the same length. I actually clapped out the syllables in these lines, and they all have basically pretty much they all have 6, 7, or 8 syllables each. So I'm going to say the lines are pretty short, and most of them have 6, 7, or 8 syllables. All right, now we're going to look at rhythm and rhyme. Now, if you forget what rhythm and rhyme is, you can come back to the website here and we can go through here and read about rhythm. So rhythm is kind of like the beat of a poem. So this is why I said it's important to read poems out loud. When writing a poem, poets carefully choose words that create a regular rhythm when the poem is read aloud. So it's kind of like a beat or a rhythm. Some syllables are pronounced more strongly than others or stressed, which kind of creates a bit of a beat or a rhythm. So when I read this poem, my mother runs a daycare. She's so wonderful with kids. And every day when I get home, she tells me what they did. Now, I was trying to work it out. Gets a little bit tricky, but I think it feels a little bit like it kind of goes up and down. It's sort of like a light word, a heavy word. So you kind of don't stress a word, do stress a word. My mother, so my is said really quietly, and then mother is a bit of a heavier. My mother runs a daycare. So kind of that second word, mother. My mother runs a daycare, and daycare. She's so wonderful with kids. And every day when I get home, she tells me what they did. She tells me what they did. It's kind of like the second word and the last word. And every day when I get home, she tells me what they did. So tells and did, every and home. She's so wonderful with kids. She's so wonderful with kids. So it's like describe the rhythm of the poem. So, all right, I think this is a pretty tricky one to work out. I think the second word and the last word in each line is, we call it stressed. So when it's kind of, you say it a little bit, almost a bit louder, like with a little bit more kind of oomph or a little bit more effort than the other words. Let's see if it works for this verse. Scott put Play-Doh in his ears, then ate a huge mud pie. I feel like the last word in each line, your tone kind of goes down. Mitch smeared lunch all down the walls, then rubbed some in his eye. Cassie took some scissors, then cut off her teddy's ears. And when they wouldn't go back on, she collapsed in floods of tears. Kind of goes down. Kind of goes down on the last word in each line. I'm going to say it has a kind of like a boppy beat. It's almost like a bit of a sing-songy, kind of like a song in a way, the way that you read it. All right, next we need to look at the rhyme, describe the rhyming pattern of the poem. So rhyme is where we're looking at the last word. So when we look at rhyming words, we usually focus on the last words in the poem in each line. So for this one, we're looking at daycare, kids, home, did. Now I notice that kids and did rhyme, daycare and home don't. So the second line and the fourth line rhyme. In this verse, I've got ears, pie, walls, eye. I notice that pie and I rhyme. So again, the second and fourth line. In this one, we've got scissors, ears, on, tears. So ears and tears, second and fourth line. So looking like this might be the rhyming pattern. Here we have artwork, glue, milk, shoe. So glue and shoe. And here, hand, toe, hours, no. So toe and no. And then we have in the last one, daycare, cool, relieved, school. So cool and school. So I can say second and fourth line rhyme. Now, sound devices, I actually had a look, and my poem doesn't use any sound devices. There's no repetition. So if we have a look here and see, repetition is when we have using a word or phrase several times. So like pitter, patter, pitter, patter. Mine has no repetition, so I'm just going to write no. Alliteration is when we have words that all begin with the same beginning sound. So like splosh, splish. Drop, drip, drop. Splosh, splish, splosh is actually alliteration and onomatopoeia. Drop, drip, drop. We haven't got any, there's no alliteration in this poem. And there's no onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a word that kind of represents or imitates a sound like plop, plip, plop, splosh, splish, splosh. And there is no onomatopoeia in this poem. So I'm going to write no. Lastly is imagery. So this is when the author really appeals to your senses and helps you to really feel the poem and really create a really strong picture in your head. So our senses are we're looking at our sight, our sound, our smell, and our touch, and also our taste. So this poem, I think, really appeals to my senses. When I read about these disasters, like Scott put Play-Doh in his ears, then ate a huge mud pie, that appeals to my taste, and I think, that's disgusting, that would taste gross. Putting Play-Doh in his ears, that appeals to my sense of touch. I can just imagine how awful that would be. Mitch smeared lunch all down the walls, then rubbed some in his eye. That appeals to my sense of touch again, and I guess my sight a little bit. I think about how much that would irritate my eyes. So I think the author has really appealed to the senses. I'm going to say the author talks about a lot of things happening. Appeal to all my senses. I'm going to give an example. For example, Mitch smearing. What was he smearing in his eye? His lunch. Mitch smearing his lunch in his eye. I can really imagine how this would feel. Now this one, what vocabulary is used to enhance descriptions? So here we're looking for really strong words that really help us to imagine what's going on. Scott put Play-Doh in his ears, then ate a huge mud pie. Mitch smeared lunch all down the walls. If she had just said Mitch put lunch all down the walls, it's not as strong a word as smeared. If you imagine smeared, you can really imagine it like running down the walls and covering the walls all over. Then rubbed some in his eye, even rubbed some in his eye instead of just put some in his eye. You can imagine it being really rubbed in and feeling horrible. This one here, she collapsed in floods of tears. She could have just said she cried, but her collapsing in floods of tears is really strong. collapsed in floods of tears. And then I would continue if I was doing this, and you guys can write as many as you can find in your poem. Lastly, we're going to talk about what I visualized as I was reading the poem. So in my mind, what picture have I got? I pictured someone's house in absolute chaos. It would be really noisy and messy with kids running everywhere, and the mother pulling her hair out with stress. Okay. All right. So that's just a really quick example of how you need to fill in this poem analysis for your poem of choice today.